Most people in Riverbend called me the quiet one at the end of Sparrow Lake Road, which was a polite way of saying nobody knew what to do with a man who'd stopped showing up to things. I'm Owen Marchetti. I was 36 that winter, running 120 acres of hayfield and a small sugar bush my grandfather planted outside a town in eastern Ontario you've never heard of, about 2 hours north of Kingston. It's not much of a farm by the standards of the big operations down the highway. A barn that leans a little more every spring, a stand of maples I tap in March, a woodlot, and the old farmhouse my parents left me when the cancer took my mother and the grief took my father a year behind her. But it kept me moving from the dark of morning to the dark of night, and that mattered more than people understood. There was a time I drove into town for no reason at all. I'd get coffee at the Tim's by the highway just to hear somebody say my name. Then 4 winters ago, my truck went through the ice on the back pond, and the cold did something to my left leg the surgeons couldn't fully undo. I walk with a hitch now, a cane when it's damp, and a brace that creaks in the cold. It's not the limp that people notice. It's the way I went still after that. Folks would wave, and I'd take a second too long to wave back, and after a while they stopped trying. I let them. The land never once asked me to hurry, and I came to prefer the kind of company that didn't. That afternoon in late November, the first real snow was coming down soft and fat over the stubble field, the kind that doesn't melt, and I'd just hauled the last of the firewood up onto the porch when I saw her standing at the bottom of the steps. Hannah Ferreira was the daughter of Gus Ferreira, the man who taught me everything I knew about sap lines and weather and patience. When the bank in Kingston wanted to call my loan after the accident, when I couldn't get out of bed let alone bring in a crop, it was Gus who drove down and sat across the desk from the loans officer and told him I wasn't finished, I was just slowed down. He passed in September. His heart in the cab of his own tractor, doing the thing he loved. I'd seen Hannah at the funeral and not since. Now, she stood in my yard in a thin gray coat that was wrong for the weather, holding the collar shut at her throat. Her dark hair had come loose under the snow. There was a duffel bag at her feet and a look on her face like she'd rehearsed something the whole drive out and lost every word of it the second I appeared. I stopped at the top of the steps. "Hannah," I said, "what's happened?" She looked up at me for a long while. The snow caught in her eyelashes. When she finally spoke, her voice came out so quiet I almost lost it under the wind. "My dad said you needed a wife." I didn't laugh. I didn't ask her to say it again, because in the space of those few words I understood more than I think she meant to tell me. I came down one step, slow, careful to leave her room, and I held her eyes and said the only honest thing I had. He was right. Her head came up. Whatever she'd braced for, it wasn't that. She started shaking her head, fast, like she could take it back for both of us. "No, you don't get it. I've got nothing, Owen. The line at the plant in Brockville cut my shift, then cut me. I'm 3 weeks behind on the apartment, and the landlord's already changed the locks once, as a warning. There's no family left, my dad was it. If I come out here, I'm just one more thing breaking down on you." When she said the word, breaking, her chin dropped, and I watched her swallow hard against the rest of it. Whatever pride Gus had handed down to her was the last thing she had, and circumstance was crushing it in front of me, and that bothered me more than I wanted to let on. "Hannah," I said, soft as I could. She went still. "Your father was the best man I ever knew in this county." My voice came out rougher than I planned. 12 years back, I showed up here knowing nothing, half broke, no people, and he taught me how to read a sky and float a tax form and which trees would give and which to leave alone. When I went through the ice and figured I'd lost it all, he was the one who told the bank I deserved another season. Her lips pressed thin. Before he passed, he came out here. He was already weak, and I told him I'd come to him, but he wouldn't have it. He sat right there. I nodded at the old chair under the maple by the porch, going white now under the snow. "He told me, Owen, my Hannah is just like her mother. She'll go hungry before she takes a thing she didn't earn. When I'm gone, if she's drowning, she won't call a soul. But you know what it is to lose everything and start from nothing. Watch out for the girl, even if she won't let you." Hannah's eyes spilled over. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. "He told me he was going to see an old friend that day. I didn't know it was you. I didn't know he came out here for that. He didn't want you to. He knew you'd fight it." She scrubbed at her face, gathering herself back together piece by piece. "And if I stay, what do people say? You know how Riverbend is. They already talk. Diane Whitmore let me go from her place and told half the county I lifted a ring off her dresser. I didn't, Owen. I swear to God I didn't take anything from that woman. She said it looking dead at me. Fear and fury sitting side by side in her face, the look of somebody backed into a corner one too many times. I believe you, I said. She froze. I could see those 3 words land harder than any comfort would have, like it had been a long while since anybody took her at her word without making her earn it first. This isn't charity, I went on. The place is too much for one man with a bad leg. The sugar bush alone, come March, I can't run the lines and boil and bottle and still get to the markets. There's the books, the orders website my mother set up that I've barely touched since she died. You need a roof, I need hands. We can make a fair arrangement out of it. She studied me, wary. What kind of arrangement? We get married. City Hall. Signatures. Done. You'd have the legal right to be here, my benefits if you ever needed them, a place that's yours. In return, you help with the house, the bush, the markets in season. You'd have your own room. Your own life. Nobody puts a thing on you that you don't choose. She was quiet a long time. Her eyes moved over the leaning barn, the field going white, the woodlot, then back to the cane in my hand and the brace I never bothered to hide. What do you get? She asked, almost too low to hear. Besides more trouble? I gave her the only smile I had left. A house that isn't so quiet, maybe. The snow kept falling. Somewhere down the road, the bell at St. Bridget's rang 4. She stood there between losing everything and starting over, and at last she pulled a shaking breath and lifted her chin even with the fear still in her eyes. Ooh, when? Ooh. I understood she wasn't asking about paperwork. Monday, I said. The clerk's office in town opens at 9. We keep it small, no fuss. She nodded, slow. Monday, then. I held the door. Come inside tonight. However you decide, you're not driving back to a town that locked you out. She stood a moment longer in the falling snow. Then she picked up her bag and came up the steps past me, and I didn't know it yet, but the quiet life I'd built like a wall around myself had just started to come down. Monday came pale and clear and cold enough to squeak underfoot. I was up before the light, lying there longer than I ever do, listening to a house that suddenly had somebody else's breathing in it. Down the hall, Hannah's door stayed shut. I shaved careful for the first time in months. I found the good shirt at the back of the closet, the one that still smelled faintly of the cedar chest my mother kept her church things in, and the dark jeans without a single stain of bar oil on them. I even ran a cloth over my boots, brace and all. When I came down, she was at the window in a navy dress, with a little white stitching at the collar, old-fashioned and plain and clearly her mother's. She turned when she heard the cane on the floorboards. Her eyes went over the clean shirt, the shaved jaw, and something in her face eased even as she fought to hide it. You look different, she said. So do you. I didn't know what to do with my hands. We didn't say much on the drive-in. Hannah kept her eyes on her lap. I kept both hands on the wheel and tried not to notice how small the cab had gotten. Walter Lindgren's was waiting outside the township office in his good coat, what was left of his hair combed flat. He'd farmed beside Gus for 40 years. He shook my hand and turned to Hannah gentle as anything. Your dad fixed my baler one whole haying season and wouldn't take a dime, he said. He was a good man. He'd be glad you're not on your own. Her eyes shone, but she didn't let them go. Thank you, Mr. Lindgren. Rosa came a few minutes later, breathless, and hugged Hannah hard, then gave me a long, careful look I'd more than earned. She pulled Hannah aside and I heard the low, urgent edge of it without meaning to. Are you sure about this? Hannah glanced at me across the little hall. I don't know what happens next, she said. But I know he doesn't look at me like I'm a burden. The ceremony was over in under 10 minutes. A clerk read the legal lines in a flat, tired voice. No music, no flowers, the two of them for witnesses. When it came time for a ring, I took out my mother's thin silver worn soft at the edge. It was hers, I said. I don't have much left of her, if you don't mind. Hannah held out her hand without a word. Her fingers shook once when the band went on. It fit better than it had any right to. Clerk cleared his throat. You may kiss if you like. She went still. I saw the hesitation in her shoulders and I leaned in slow, leaving her every chance to step back. She didn't. I touched my mouth to hers for less than a second, barely a kiss at all, and when I straightened her eyes had gone wide and dark, and she looked as caught off guard as I felt. Walter clapped once, loud in the little room. Rosa laughed through sudden tears. Go on home, you two, Walter said, his voice gone thick. A house with somebody in it shouldn't have a cold stove. Gornagorn. On the way back, she turned the ring slow with her thumb like she was trying to make herself believe it. You hungry? I asked after a while. She looked over like she'd forgotten food was a thing. A little. I've got bread and eggs and not much skill. I've managed not to poison myself yet. A small laugh got out of her, the first real sound of relief I'd heard since she turned up in my yard. I can cook. My mother taught me. When my dad got sick, I made every meal he ate. She stopped. The sadness that lived just under her skin showed itself again. I didn't reach for some empty thing to say. I just laid my hand over hers on the seat for a moment, and she didn't pull away. When we turned up the lane, she looked out at the white field and the leaning barn. It's bigger than I remembered. Too big for one, I said, and glanced at her. Not anymore, though. She didn't answer, but I saw her fingers tighten in the fabric of the dress. I gave her the room upstairs that had been my mother's. A wooden bed, a small dresser, an old mirror, a chair by the window over the field. On the dresser, I'd put a jar of dried bittersweet I'd cut from the fence line that morning before she woke. She stood in front of it a long while, and I felt foolish. I don't know what people like. I just figured a new room ought to have something in it. She turned around with her eyes wet again, but lighter this time. Thank you, Owen. Not just the room, for not making me feel like something somebody left at the curb. I didn't have an answer for that. I only nodded. That first week, we found a shape to the days. She was up before the light, cooking, and the house started to smell like a place again. She took over my mother's old website in an afternoon and had the maple syrup orders sorted and shipping by the end of it, muttering at the spreadsheet like it had wronged her personally. I spent my hours in the woodlot and along the fences, and I found more and more reasons to come past the kitchen window. She caught me at it and never once called me on it. One gray afternoon, she found me out by the sugar shack, checking the lines for spring, and she crouched down without being asked and started clearing brush from the taps. These spiles are shot, she said, sure of herself in a way she wasn't anywhere else. You'll lose half your run through cracked lines. My dad replaced his every third year, no arguing about it. I watched her, surprised. She looked up and caught me. What? Wondering why Diane Whitmore would let go of somebody who clearly knows what she's doing. Her face went dark. She sat back on her heels and wiped her hands on her jeans. She said I stole a ring off her dresser, told everyone she found it in my coat while I was cleaning the upstairs. I never touched it, Owen. My dad raised me that your name's worth more than money. I've got next to nothing, but I don't steal. I believe you, I said again, easy as the first time. She looked at me like she still couldn't work out why it came so simple to me. I lowered myself onto an upturned crate beside her, leg out straight. Diane Whitmore tried to buy this place off me 2 summers back. Wanted the maple stand, the whole lot. I said no. Ever since she's made a project out of me. Tells the shops in town not to stock my syrup. Got a word into the bank when I was already down. She does not care for being told no by a man like me. If she lets you go, you can bet there was something in it for her. Hannah pressed her hand flat to the cold ground. Her shoulders were shaking. Why are you so good to me? I looked out at the bare maples we sat under. Because I know what it is to be measured by the one thing you can't change. After the ice, people looked at the cane and decided who I was before I opened my mouth. Some figured I was bitter. Most just figured I was finished. I put my hand to my bad knee without thinking. Your father was one of the only ones who still looked at me and saw a man. Seems like my turn. She stared at the brace a long moment. Then she did a thing almost nobody had done. She reached over and rested her hand on it, light, like it didn't frighten her at all. I don't see a broken man, she said, quiet but certain. I see somebody who got hurt and kept going. That's not weakness. That's the opposite. My throat closed up. I couldn't have answered if I'd tried. 2 weeks after the township office, we went to the winter market in the community hall in town. First, the staring, then the whispering, the way it carries in a room with a low ceiling and 100 years of everybody knowing everybody. Rosa found us between the tables and pulled Hannah aside. I stayed close enough to hear. You need to know what's going around, Rosa said. Diane's telling people you only married Owen because you're expecting, that the whole thing's a sham, that you're using him to get clear of your debts. Hannah went pale. What? I know it's a lie, but people are repeating it. She's saying you went after a lonely man on purpose. And there she was, Diane Whitmore, somewhere in her 50s, in a wool coat that had no business at a church hall market, gold at her wrist, catching the fluorescent light. She stopped at our table and looked Hannah up and down, like she was pricing something secondhand. The new bride, she said, sweet and poisoned both. Don't you look right at home behind a table of jars, Hannah? Your father spent good money trying to make a lady of you, and here you are, right back where you started. I kept my voice flat. Morning, Mrs. Whitmore, you here to buy, or just to waste a working day? She turned that smile on me, sharper. Still blunt as a stump, Owen. I suppose a desperate man can't afford manners. Then she pitched her voice up just enough for the next tables to catch it. How's married life? Worked out yet what she's after? The whole county knows the girl married you to keep a roof over her head. Before I could answer, Hannah stepped in close to me and took my hand in front of everybody. Her fingers were ice, but her voice came out clear. My marriage to Owen is our business, Mrs. Whitmore, not yours. And if you're this interested in our lives, maybe you ought to ask yourself why your own is so empty you have to fill it up with other people's names. The hall went quiet. Diane's face flushed dark. You're a penniless nobody, she hissed. I can undo you with one phone call. Hannah's grip tightened, but she didn't give an inch. You already tried. You called me a thief. You took my job. You did your best to put me on the street. And I'm still standing here because the truth wears better than your lies do. Diane's voice dropped low and ugly. The truth is you got into his bed before any ring. The truth is there's likely a bastard in your belly this minute. A ripple of shocked breath moved through the room. Hannah went white. I felt her hand start to shake and I stepped forward. Hannah is my wife in the eyes of the law and anyone whose opinion's worth a damn. She's got more honor than the whole crowd you've got whispering for you. If somebody in this room has a word to say about my wife, they can come say it to me. But I'll tell you now, I won't stand here and watch anyone drag her name through the mud. Father Doyle, who'd come over for the parish vegetables, set his basket down. He looked at Diane with a quiet, terrible disappointment. Those are serious accusations, Diane, and you've brought no proof of one of them. This isn't the kind of town that's built on rumor. I'd suggest you apologize, or I'd suggest you leave. Diane looked around and found the room had turned. People had seen Hannah take my hand. They'd seen me stand in front of her. Whatever this marriage was, it didn't look like the lie she'd been selling. This isn't over, she said low, and turned and walked out. Hannah stood beside me shaking. I bent down. You all right? She looked up, eyes red but unbroken. No, she said, honest, but I'm not letting her tell me who I am. I took her hand again. From here on, we deal with her together. It was the first time I'd said we and meant it as something more than the paperwork. Something between us had moved. 3 days later, Walter came up the lane with his face set wrong. He'd seen the way I kept a hand at the small of Hannah's back, the way she reached up without thinking to straighten my collar, and ordinarily that would have put a smile on him. Not today. Diane's making it official, he said. She's been in to see the bank. Filed something with the township, too, questioning whether your marriage is real. The bank started talking about calling your operating loan early. $40,000. She's pushing them to want it inside 2 weeks. Hannah went cold beside me. Can she even do that? Walter sighed. She's got money, and she's got the right friends. If she can make it look like Hannah was coerced, or that the whole thing's a business deal, she can drag the both of you in front of a judge. And the bank's already nervous with her leaning on them. How long? I said. 2 weeks, maybe less. That night, Hannah and I sat out under the maple where her father once sat. The chair gone into the porch now, snow ringing the trunk. She held my hand tight. I'm scared, she said. Not of losing the farm. I'm scared of losing you. I pulled her into my side. You won't. Even if we lose the land, the house, all of it, as long as we've still got each other, we start again. How are you so sure? Because I already lost nearly everything once. I learned things get taken. But love only goes if you let go of it. The next morning we drove in to see a lawyer Father Doyle vouched for, and Rosa went digging on her own account. Her cousin worked in the land registry office in the county seat. 3 days on, she came up the lane flushed, a folder against her chest. I found it, she said, spreading paper across the kitchen table. Diane bought a parcel off old Ernie Babcock 2 years back, after his mind started to go. The sales got every mark of fraud on it. He'd been declared incapable not 6 months later. She's been using that land as collateral. It's how she's got her hooks into the bank. We can prove it, and her hold on them falls apart. We meant to take it all to the county office first thing the next morning. But that night I heard something out by the barn. I was up at once. Hannah woke too. I told her to stay put and she took my hand and looked at me with her jaw set. No, we go together. We went down quiet, Me with a length of stove wood, her with the flashlight. At the barn, 3 men were running gasoline along the boards. One of them I knew, Brad Coyle, who'd been out of work since the mill closed. Stop, I said. They froze. Brad's face came apart. Owen, it's nothing personal. Whitmore pays, I owe her. Hannah stepped up beside me, voice like a blade. So you were going to burn our barn, our whole spring run, everything we've put into this place. Brad couldn't answer. Then lights swung in off the road, Walter and 4 of the neighbors coming fast through the snow with flashlights and tire irons. Walter had seen strange trucks turning up our lane and put the word out. Not so fast, Walter said, cold as the night. Whole county's going to hear about this one. 2 of them bolted. We held Brad. By morning, he'd told the OPP and the Crown everything, the money, the orders, all of it, Diane Whitmore's name on every page of it. 3 weeks on, the matter came before a judge in the courthouse in town. Hannah and I walked in, holding hands. Diane sat across the room with a lawyer on each side. The gold was still on her wrist, but her hands wouldn't stay still. Justice Marion Beaulieu read it out in a clear, unhurried voice. First, the marriage of Owen Marchetti and Hannah Ferreira is legal and valid. Father Doyle and several witnesses have confirmed it was entered freely. There is no evidence of coercion, and ample evidence the relationship has become a genuine one. Hannah let out a breath she'd been holding. I squeezed her hand. Second, there is clear evidence that Diane Whitmore obtained land from Mr. Ernest Babcock by fraud at a time he lacked the capacity to sell. That transaction is void. The collateral she pledged against it is worthless, and her interference with Mr. Marchetti's loan was improper and is to cease. The room stirred. Diane came to her feet, voice cracking. This is all because of Gus Ferreira. He made a fool of me in front of this whole town 30 years ago. Father Doyle stood, slow. Gus is gone, Diane. The one who ruined your life isn't him. It's you, for carrying that hate around all these years until there was no room in you for anything else. And then there was the harder part, the one I'd promised Hannah I'd watch for. The Crown attorney stood and laid out the second matter. The arson, the men Diane had hired, Brad Coyle's full statement. Justice Beaulieu set her court date and her conditions and made it plain there'd be no walking free from a thing like that hiring men to burn a family's barn in the night was as serious as the law gets outside of someone being killed. Diane left the courthouse that day with an officer at her elbow and a date she couldn't talk her way out of, and the whole town watched her go. When the doors closed, people began to clap, not loud, more like relief let out all at once. Rosa held Hannah and cried and laughed both. Walter put his hand on my shoulder. Your mother'd be proud, he said, thick. Gus too. That evening there was a small thing in the town square, lights strung between the lampposts, somebody's fiddle, hot cider against the cold. Hannah and I stood close under the lights. You remember, I said into her ear, the night you stood in my yard and told me your father said I needed a wife? She smiled. And you said he was right. I shook my head. I was wrong. She looked up, startled. I didn't need a wife, I said, holding her eyes. I needed you. You, exactly, my partner, my home. Her eyes filled. I love you, Owen Marchetti. The leg, the quiet, every part of you. The snow had let up by spring, and the farm was a different place. Hannah's stall was the busiest at the market, her syrup taking ribbons at the fall fair before the year was out. We made the loan payment on time and the one after it. We patched the barn roof, put 2 more hives along the fence line, brought the website up so the orders came in faster than we could box them. People who used to look the other way started stopping by. Walter came for Sunday supper every week without fail. Ooh. One warm afternoon in May, she stood out in the rows of new green with her hand resting light against her middle, and I came up from the field and saw her face before she said a word. Hannah. She took my hand and laid it where hers had been. We're going to have a baby. I stood dead still. Then I lifted her clean off the ground and turned her around in the middle of the garden while she laughed and cried at the same time, and I said it 3 times. That I loved her, that I loved both of them, that I loved this whole life I'd never once thought to ask for. We sat that evening under the old maple. I'd built a bench there over the winter and carved our letters into the back of it, an O and an H grown into each other. She put her head on my shoulder and spoke soft into the wind, moving through the new leaves. Thank you, Dad. You were right. I looked out past the field to the sun going down behind the woodlot. My arm around my wife and my hand over the place our first was already growing. And I thought about how I'd been so sure my whole life would only ever be hay and seasons and an old leg and rooms that didn't echo back. And then a woman had stood in my snowed-in yard with a shaking voice and one plain sentence, and out of that one sentence I'd been handed everything I have. For a long time I believed the worst thing that ever happened to me was the ice on the back pond. I thought the cold had taken the use of my leg and the better part of my life with it. Looking back now from this bench under the maple, I understand it differently. The accident didn't ruin me. What it nearly did was talk me into ruining myself, into deciding that a man who limps and goes quiet has nothing left worth offering anyone. I almost spent the rest of my days behind that wall, and the only reason I didn't is that Hannah Ferreira stood in my snowed-in yard and said one plain, terrified sentence, and I chose, for once, not to flinch away from it. Nothing about how it turned out was luck. When the bank started circling and Diane Whitmore had her hooks in everyone who owed her, the thing that held was the choice I'd made years earlier to keep my word and pay what I owed and never once put my name to anything I'd be ashamed of. That's what let Walter and the neighbors come up my lane in the middle of the night without being asked. People will stand in the cold for a man they trust, and trust isn't given to you, it's built one honest season at a time. Diane had money and connections, and not one soul who'd lift a finger for her, and that wasn't bad fortune either. She earned every bit of her own emptiness, the same way I earned every friend who showed up when the gasoline was already on the boards. I've thought a lot about why Hannah and I made it through, and Diane went out of that courthouse with an officer at her elbow. It comes down to 3 things I want to pass on, plainly. Do right even when no one's keeping score, because the quiet honesty of your ordinary days is the only thing that holds when the hard night comes. Use your head. The way Hannah read those cracked sap lines, and Rosa thought to check the land registry instead of just being angry, because feeling wronged solves nothing and a clear, patient mind finds the proof. And when you've lost something that can't be given back, get up anyway. Keep going on, the bad leg. The strength to stand again after you've been knocked flat is the one thing no Diane Whitmore in the world can take from you. If you're sitting alone in a house that's gone too quiet tonight, convinced the worst thing that happened to you is the whole truth of who you are, I'd ask you to hold the door open one more time. The life waiting on the other side of it might be the one you stopped letting yourself believe in. Mine was standing on the porch the whole while, holding a duffel bag, waiting for me to say one true word.